All right, so condo owners. Oh, you condo owners. You have a lot of disclosures you have to make, and that's mostly because of your condo association. And I'll quickly note that this video, I'm doing it more from the seller's perspective since they have to fill this out. But if you're the buyer watching this, you'll still get a good idea of the gist of the form, but a lot of the things that I say won't apply to you. All right, so what this form is here is actually two different forms combined into one. They're both required, but it's just easier to fill them both out at the same time. One's a condo rider, that's the first one here, and that discloses about the association. And the other form is a seller's disclosure, and it discloses the condition of your condo. So they're both combined here, but we have them separated out in the forms section on the yellow website if you prefer to do it that way. All right, so condo owners, you have to fill these out, and then there's other documents you have to provide as well. And maybe you remember them from when you bought the place. You can see them here. Just start getting them ready because you're going to have to give them to buyers. All right, so let's get into this form. Now, first of all, you'll see a lot of text on these pages. I'm not going to read through it all. I'm just going to touch on some of the areas that you fill in, but you need to be sure to read it all. All right. First, like always, I'll point out the wizard at the top of the page here. It should be green, which means it's turned on by default. So the wizard is what shows the explanation and walks you through the form. If you want, you can turn it off, and you can still see the descriptions there, but the descriptions aren't as pretty and it won't walk you through the form. So however you want to do it, it's up to you, but just be aware that that's what it does. And also be aware that clicking the X in this corner here also turns off the wizard, which is kind of annoying, but just know that that's what's happening. If you want to close a box, just click somewhere outside the box and that'll close it. All right, and I guess I'll also note that it's very important to fill out this form correctly. A lot of lawsuits happen because somebody just zipped through this disclosure, didn't really read the questions, and then you end up in court. So be sure to take your time and read everything. All right, getting into it. First line you'll fill in is the name. We are John and Jane Smithsonian. And the property address. And then you'll have to initial. I point out in some of the other videos that since we're John and Jane Smithsonian, the initials will both be the same. They're both JS. And just for the purposes of this demonstration, just so you can see the differences, we're going to do two different initials here. We're going to do for John, J-O-N, and sign. And if there is a second party, don't click the sign button because that'll automatically populate it with the last one you did. So we're going to click new, add new signature, which is add new initial. And instead of JS for Jane Smith, to make them different, we're just going to do JAN. So you can see there's a difference there. I'll also note the reason these are spaced the way they are, you can kind of see because of the time date stamp here. Sometimes this would cover up the other initials, so that's why you'll see them spaced out the way they are. Looks a little funky, but that's the reason why. All right, getting into it now. Section 1. This is saying that, let's click that. This is saying that your association does or does not need to approve the buyer. It's not all that common, but let's just check yes here. And then you'll see, let's go next. And then you'll see that you have to get approval at least 5 days before closing. And this is important because sometimes the approval needs to be face-to-face and the buyer will have to go to a meeting. And you got to be sure to time it before the close. So, if there's not going to be a face-to-face meeting before the close, you gotta work on that. So just pay attention here. And then next, you have 5 days to start the process of getting the buyer approved once this offer is accepted. So these numbers, 5 days, those are default. You can change it however you want. It's up to you. All right, section 2. Now this part isn't really done all that often. It's the right of first refusal. And what that is, it means the association can buy the condo before a regular buyer buys it. So let's just check yes or has. You can read through the rest of it. I should note that there's a clause here that if the buyer gets pushed out, the real estate agent gets their commission. We'll deal with that if it comes up. Again, it's pretty rare. So there's that. And the buyer also gets their deposit back. Section 3, this is where you disclose all the fees. You can read through it. Say you got to pay the association fee of $50 a month. So you just enter that there. If there's a special assessment, enter that there. Recreation areas, if there's a separate fee, enter that there. Pretty self-explanatory. Now, pay attention to this, part C, because that's where a lot of problems come from. It's about special assessments, which are things like the condo association is, say they're going to repave the parking lot and charge the condo owners. It's something like that. You have to disclose this. And the important part is you have to disclose it if it's been in the minutes within the last year. Sometimes that can be hard to know. You can't say, well, I don't know, I don't go to the meetings. This is where you get in trouble. So you have to know it. If a buyer later finds this out, they'll sue you and they'll win. So you can enter that there. Part 2, here you'll check the box depending on who should pay for the installments. If it's like a repaving or something that's long lasting, usually the buyer would pay. If it was something like, say, a fireworks luau party that you already had and they're stretching out the payments, then the seller should pay that. That's not really a thing, a fireworks luau party. Well, maybe it is. Sounds kind of fun. But anyway, it's just an example here. Usually it's the buyer that pays. Part 3 says if the buyer finds out about assessments that the seller didn't disclose, then the seller will have to pay that amount at closing. So that's another reason why it's important, if you're the seller, to do your research and disclose things. I guess you can just read the rest of section C here. It's pretty self-explanatory. Section D, basically the same as C, but it's for any litigation pending against the condos. Even if you aren't aware of any litigation, if the buyer finds it in the minutes, then you got a problem. Section 4, you can read that. Section 5, these are the documents that you need to give to the seller, and this is filled in by the buyer. They'll check A, if they receive those documents. Those are the ones that we talked about in the beginning, the articles of incorporation, all that. They'll check it if they receive those documents along with this form. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. They'll check box B if they haven't received the documents along with this form. But that still means you have to get them to them, and they have 3 days after receiving those documents to cancel the deal. Next page. Number 6 is saying that the buyer is requesting these documents. It's not often they'll say they don't want them, so this box is checked by default. And it also says that if the seller has to pay to get the documents and then the deal falls through, like say there's like copying costs and it's $10 or something, the deal falls through, the buyer will reimburse the seller for those costs or return the documents. Number 7 is saying they receive the documents on whatever date that it is. If they don't get them now, they'll just have to acknowledge it later. Section 8 is just talking about whatever other items come with the condo. If they have assigned parking spaces or a garage or whatever, you just enter that there. And you can read through the rest of this page. And that's it for that rider. Let me add one quick note on that. Those documents, we're not allowed to look at them and give our opinion on them, like whether they're accurate or whatever. You got to talk to an attorney about them. So that's just a little disclosure on our part. All right, moving on to the second form. This is the seller disclosure form, and this one is for condos. It's important to note because there's a different one for houses because they have different stuff, so they have different disclosures. And it's Florida law for people selling their home to disclose any problems about it. And it's for big problems that the buyer can't really see, like maybe the foundation is cracked or the roof leaks sometimes, things like that. And it's also important to note that it's only for the things a seller knows about. But if you're the seller, you can't play dumb here. Like, say a buyer moves in and the roof leaks at the first rainstorm. You can't be like, oh, I had no idea, and expect that to be okay, because you're going to end up in court. So it's better to disclose these things now than deal with lawsuits later, because it really does happen. All right, and again, there's a lot of text here. I'm not going to go through everything, but please be sure to read all of these sections. I'll also note, this section is probably easier with the wizard off. Turn this off. Otherwise, it'll walk through every one of these fields. You can see there's a whole bunch of them here. So you can turn this off and go through them on your own. It's pretty self-explanatory, so you shouldn't have too much problem with it. All right, first thing we come to, enter the property address again. All right. And then you're going to note if you live in it or if it has a renter. That's what tenant occupied means. So we'll just enter owner occupied. One thing to note about this occupied section, say you're renting the condo out, you can't say you don't live there so you don't know the conditions, because that really doesn't fly. You still know if there's problems, because a tenant will tell you. You get the phone calls, hey, the roof's leaking, things like that. So you can't get away with something by pleading ignorant, because again, you'll end up in court and you'll lose. All right, so you can go through this form. It's pretty self-explanatory. Again, we're going to initial John and Jane. I'll scroll back up so you see how the timestamp falls, so it would block the second signature. So scroll through here. You only have to fill out the sections that applies to your unit. Be sure to initial the bottom. And then we come to the final page. Actually, it's the second to last page. We're going to do the signature, add new signature. You're going to do your actual signature here. So John Smithsonian. Sign. You type your name. You can fill the whole thing out. You just save time. We're not going to do it. Enter the date. New signature for Jane. Sign. Type the name, date. Be sure to do the initials at the bottom. And then there's one last page here called the seller's update. A lot of people forget about this. It's the very last one. And even if there's no updates, we're going to add our signature to the bottom here. John Smithsonian, type your name, date. Jane Smithsonian, type your name, date. And then you're going to add the initials at the bottom here. Jane, John. And that's about it for this form. Click the done button, submit it. If you're the seller doing this, we'll get it to the buyer and they'll fill the applicable sections out. And that's about it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Thanks. Have a great day. Bye.